Good afternoon and welcome to today's joint work session with the County Board of Arlington, Virginia and the School Board, Arlington Public Schools. We are here to discuss and share information and collaborate on the fiscal year 2022 budget. And we will go right into some background and some presentations from our chair of our school board. We'll do introductions quickly, and as a way of just for our public, we all know each other, of course, but for efficiency, we'll start with the members of the county board, and I'll say I'm Chair Matt DeFerranti, and I'll send it to our vice chair, and then in rough order of seniority, since we're all looking via Teams. Go ahead, Ms. Crystal.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Katie Crystal, Vice Chair of the County Board. Pleasure. And I think this may be our first joint meeting with your new colleagues on the school board. So a particular pleasure to be joining Ms. Diaz-Torres and Mr. Pretty.
Ms. Garvey.
Yep. Libby Garvey, a member of the Arlington County Board. Great to see everybody. This is it's nice to get together, even if it's virtual.
Yes, and also former school board member, so brings that perspective as well. Mr. Dorsey.
Good afternoon, everyone. Christian Dorsey. Thrilled to join with you all today.
Thank you, Mr. Karatonis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is a pleasure to be with all of you here today. Tax Karatonis, member of the Arlington County Board.
Thank you, board members. We also have our manager, Mark Schwartz, and several staff, which we will introduce in due course, but there's Mr. Schwartz appearing perfectly in perfect timing. And we will now send it over to our chair of our school board. I just want to echo Ms. Crystal's comments. This is the first joint session for Ms. Diaz-Torres and Mr. Pretty, so welcome. And also Mr. Karatonis, welcome to your first of these collaborative sessions to my recollection. So over to our chair of our school board, Ms. O'Grady.
Thank you very much, Mr. DeFerranti. We are so happy to be able to join you, and thank you all for hosting us today. I am Monique O'Grady, and I am the chair of the Arlington School Board. And today we have joining with us our Vice Chair, Dr. Barbara Cannonen. Dr. Cannonen. In addition to that,
continue passing it around. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I will pass it over to Mr. Goldstein.
Hi, Reed Goldstein, member of the Arlington School Board. Pleasure to be here. Thrilled, as Christian Dorsey said, thrilled to be here today. And I will pass it to Mr. Pretty.
Thank you, Mr. Goldstein. I'm excited to be here. My first joint work session. So let's get started. I'll throw it over to Ms. Diaz-Torres.
I will wrap us up. It is so lovely to join all of you and this incredible team of leaders leading our county through these trying times. It's my absolute pleasure and honor to be at this virtual table with all of y'all.
Wonderful. Thank you. Ms. O'Grady.
Mr. DeFerranti, may I please introduce also the superintendent of our school system, Dr. Francisco Duran.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back with everyone, and look forward to the conversation today. Thank you.
And Dr. Duran, I believe you have a staff member or two with us.
There are several members of our executive leadership team are present. Do you want me to introduce everyone, Ms. O'Grady?
No, we probably don't have time to introduce everyone. I just didn't know if you wanted to introduce Ms. Peterson, because we may call on her to answer questions.
Ms. Peterson is here, who will be providing a lot of assistance through the budget process today, but we also have all the members of our executive leadership team as well.
Thank you very much, Dr. Duran. I want to thank all of our APS staff members for joining us for this important program today. And with that, Mr. DeFerranti, I'd like to send it back to you.
Great. So just big picture, our agenda this afternoon. Thank you, Chair O'Grady. We're going to be starting with a presentation that the chair of our school board, Ms. O'Grady, will lead. Then we'll go to a few comments from school board members, followed by questions from the county board. And then we will, the county board, our manager at this stage, will present our proposed budget, and we'll have some questions from the school board members. We also have presentations from our Teen Network Board and the Arlington Partnership for Children, Youth, and Families that will round out our session. We have a packed agenda, and it's a great chance to collaborate. We'll send it to you, Chair O'Grady.
Thank you very much, Mr. DeFerranti. And I would like to present to you our presentation today for our joint work session. I thank you, Ms. Peterson, for bringing up the slides. This is going to be a story about who we are, what our challenges are right now, how we're working to face them, and how you, county board members, can help us reach success. So we'd like to first of all thank you for your continued and previous support. And here's some key takeaways that we'd like for you to be aware of as we go through the presentation. You'll see that we'll be talking about the COVID-19 pandemic emergency, and that the experience that our students and our staff have felt and our system have felt will continue to challenge us instructionally. We'll have to look at social emotional needs, and we will continue to have some economic challenges because of that. In spite of that, though, our budget will be focused on supporting education and equity as well. We have some limited additional resources to help provide those supports. However, we're working our best to address them as efficiently and as successfully as we possibly can in spite of those challenges. We also need to look at how we can provide our hardworking staff a compensation increase. We're looking at preserving our quality programs and services. The school board has looked at the superintendent's proposed revised budget, and we found $6.9 million in reductions to help move us forward to a balanced budget. And we understand and know that a strong partnership with you, the county board, and the schools continues to be essential. First, we'd like to start off with thank you. We'd like to take a look back on how we have been able to collaborate over the years. You will see that we do depend on your support in order to meet the needs of our students and our staff and to make our system one of the best in the area. And you'll see that historically here represented on this slide. In addition to that, we also depend on other funds as well. But let's talk about how we have been able to collaborate over the last year in particular. When the federal government stepped up to support states and counties across the country, you, the county board, shared with us $7 million in CARES Act funding so we could better support our students. Included in those dollars were $500,000 to help us fund wireless internet for our students. We work collaboratively across our staff to also work on ways to make sure our students could access APS wireless in other ways on county properties. We have also worked to make sure that our students and families were able to eat and have the food that they needed while they faced economic challenges in their households. And you continue to collaborate with us on instructional learning support so we can continue that even as we have our students back in our buildings. So thank you for your continued collaboration and assistance. Now I want to talk a little bit about who we are. And we'll start off with who we are as a school system. I don't know that everyone knows it, and it's hard to tell from our pie chart, but basically what that shares there is that we are a majority minority school district. In addition to that, we do have special populations that we do serve in our system. Those include our special ed students, our economically disadvantaged students, and our EL learners. You can see that over time, those students' numbers have grown in our system. And while it may look as though we're leveling off, one of the things that we do understand is that the economic impact and our desire to meet those students, especially when we focus on equity, continues to grow. And you will see that in future slides in this presentation. Now, this is an interesting slide, but what I would love for you to take from this is one very important note. And you'll see that in burgundy, which is between 2005, our lowest point of enrollment, and 2020, APS has actually seen a 46% enrollment growth. You will notice as well along that green line that we did have a dip, and that dip is representative of this last year. Of course, because of COVID, we have seen a decline in student population as families looked for other alternatives to educate their children. We are anticipating that many of the students will return. That dip I want to share with you as we have our consultant who looks at demographics and projections. He shared with us that this is not unusual, that school systems across the country are seeing a dip, and we want to make sure that we are prepared to reach all of those students if they do come back. In fact, right now we are doing a survey to try to determine how many of those families who have left APS because of COVID may be returning. And we'd also like to show that we are projected to reach enrollment of almost 31,000 students pre-K through 12 by 2027, we anticipate that will be our peak. Next slide. This shows you in more depth our enrollment and cost per pupil. You'll see that as we enter FY 2022, we are anticipating almost 30,000 students. And again, as I mentioned, we are looking at trying to figure out from our families if they are planning to come back from the dip that you see from the current year, which is about 27,000. You'll also see that we have increased our cost per pupil, and you'll notice that in the prior year when we had a huge economic downturn that happened very late in the year where we had to recalculate, we did have a dip. But if you look at the year prior, FY 2020, we had a cost per pupil at about 19,921, and we're getting a little bit closer to moving up on an average that reflects previous averages. Next slide, please. Let's take a look at our economic realities. We've had to balance many different challenges in order to meet our students' needs, and here's some of the things that we are facing. In the past, we've seen a county revenue increase of about 4%, and the average increase over 3 years prior to FY 21 was 19.3 million. This year, we're seeing a county revenue that is essentially flat. And we've also previously seen increases from the state that have averaged about 6%. This year, we're going to see half of that increase from the state. Thank goodness we have the American Rescue Plan that will give us one-time funding, and it looks as though at this point we're looking at an $18.9 million support from that plan. Here's some other external budget factors we're facing. The state has asked us, and rightfully so, to ensure that our counselor ratios will really meet the demand, I think, when it comes to the social emotional needs that our students have faced over this last year from COVID. Fortunately for us, we have actually already met those ratios at the secondary level, though we do need to increase them at the elementary level, and that is baked into the superintendent's proposed revised budget, and the school board has endorsed those movements. We are seeing an increase in the Virginia retirement system rate, which is going to cost us more money, and we have some concerns about competitive teacher salary scales in Northern Virginia. You will see in future slides that we have some challenges there to continue to keep up with our neighboring districts, and that the General Assembly is providing incentive for us to move forward, which actually is a complicated factor for us in Arlington County. We have seen that the county manager's budget proposes a flat tax rate, which we understand, especially as we see that property rates or property tax or property values have been increasing. So we do understand that. And then when we take a look at APS, we're looking at our K-12 enrollment as shown in previous slides. We're expecting them to increase to pre-pandemic level. We are seeing operating cost rising, including the need to mitigate learning loss over the last year. We are adding 2 new buildings, and we have 3 school moves. Our students with disabilities are requiring us to meet their challenges and needs in an equitable way, which is also causing our costs to rise. We're seeing our ADA accommodations with staff increase. I'll give you an example. When we look at the American Sign Language, we are seeing $1 million in additional need this year to support our staff, and another $1 million to support our students. Our substitute needs will continue to rise as our student population and staff needs rise, and our health insurance is also increasing. This year, we're seeing a 6% increase in cost. You might say, oh, school board, APS, what are you doing to tighten your belt? You can take a look at these past years and see that we have worked to find reductions over the past several years, ranging from $11 million to more than $16 million. Some of those examples of how we found some efficiencies included increasing class sizes. We have done that last year, and we actually in this year have an increase of proposed for increasing kindergarten classes by 1. We have eliminated the foreign language in elementary schools program, the FLES program, and we have also, when possible, increased user fees. We've changed planning factors to decrease the number of staff we need. We've had to to actually postpone some of our growth initiatives so that we can afford them. We have eliminated, unfortunately, some benefits, or we have decreased them, including TDM, transportation supports for our teachers and staff. We've constantly reduced our central office, and unfortunately, we've had to drastically cut our major maintenance and minor construction, or we've had to fund it with one-time funds. Now let's look at our current budget challenges. As we enter a new school year and summer school, we will be offering full in-person and full distance learning. The state has suggested that we do both, and we are going to try to meet the needs of our families who are looking at trying to figure out whether they're ready to come back in person or not. We also are anticipating a larger than normal number of students coming off of COVID. In fact, we put an extra $1 million into our summer school program to try to meet the needs for an increased number of students this summer. We also have determined, after we have opened the door and asked our teachers and assistants to please apply for summer school positions, that we're going to need more to get them to teach in person. And so we are now at a point where we feel we have to offer incentives to get our teachers and assistants to teach in person again this summer, as many of them are facing many challenges and a lot of stress, having to change the way they've taught, sometimes 3 times over the last school year. When we look to fall return to school, we will also offer full in-person and some full distance learning as well. In order to bring forward that full distance learning, we will have some additional costs, which include adding an administrator to help manage this new opportunity or continued opportunity for students, as well as materials and software for our students and teachers, so we can continue to offer a robust and valuable distance learning program. We will also, as we mentioned earlier, need to address the additional social and emotional supports for our students and our staff. One of the things you will find with this budget is that we will continue to push on education, but also equity. And I just want to go back to about 2 years ago when 2 or 3 years ago when we had our meeting that's just like this one, and we asked you to please help us fund a Chief Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Officer. You did. And Mr. Aaron Gregory has been in that position for going on 2 years at this point, and what he's done for us is very important. One of the things that he really wants to move forward is an equity audit. We cannot manage, we cannot maintain, we cannot fix what we do not know and what we do not measure. And so this budget includes funding for a needed equity audit. Other things that we are going to be looking at from Mr. Gregory include continuing professional development funding, and that development funding will build on, we had a day of equity, professional learning this year. We're looking at putting equity teams in place in our schools and providing stipends so they can do the work on the ground that will make a difference in every school in our system. We're also working on providing stipends so that we can have better community and family engagement for those families for whom regular engagement may not be as successful. And we're also funding a budget study to provide more information on how we can make sure that we're equitably allocating our resources. We're also looking at enrollment growth, as I explained in previous slides. And as I said earlier, we're looking at new school moves and openings, including Cardinal Elementary School, which is going to be the name for the new elementary school that opens at Reed. And in addition to moving 3 schools into new or different buildings, we're also opening the Education Center, which previously was our home for central office and staff and the board. And we're going to be using that as new learning environment, and that will need furniture and technology. As I mentioned previously, compensation has been a challenge for us this year. But one of the things that we determined quite early in the process, and Dr. Duran brought to us in his proposed budget, was that it's important for us to recognize all of our employees for their work over the past year and show them that we do value them. This is not an unusual concept because the General Assembly also feels that our educational leaders in our state need to be compensated and appreciated and valued. And so they approved a 2 to 5% raise in the state budget. I want to just give you a little bit of history about how we've dealt with compensation in the past. Now, prior to fiscal year 2010, we were committed and we were able to provide our staff a step increase and a cost of living adjustment every year. But since fiscal year 2010, we've not been able to do so. We had 4 years, there were no step increase. We had 1 year, a step increase that was instituted midway through the year. And we have only been able to add on a cost of living adjustment only once. Our surrounding jurisdictions, unfortunately, have been able to do more. And because of that, at one point when APS was a leader in compensation, they have actually caught up to us. In some situations, they've surpassed us. We are working on a compensation study so that we can figure out how to move forward in a way that continues to put us in a different direction and to help us understand how our salary scales can continue or at least return to being competitive and fiscally sustainable. And we need to do that as we prepare for collective bargaining. Now I want to tell you a little bit about our budget. Our budget highlights will include enrollment growth, and that also includes increasing needs for our English language learners and students with disabilities. Again, instructional and mental health support, funding for our diversity, equity, inclusion office, new buildings and school moves, investments to support growth. We have some needs around safety and security. We want to make sure that we can technologically continue to connect with our staff, with our students. And also we have to make sure that we can operationally support a larger number of students in our system. So here's what that all adds up to. Our total expenditure needs are at $699.9 million, while our total revenue is at $685 million, leaving us a gap of $14.9 million. Here's how that breaks down. You can see there that we have enrollment growth, how we have baked in compensation into the superintendent's proposed revised budget at $9.8 million. We have a phase-in of initiatives from prior budgets that we had to space out in order to afford. We have some new investments that I've already spoken about. And then we have some reinstatement of our FY21 reductions. And that means for the superintendent's proposed revised budget, we're looking at an increase of $34.63 million in 110 positions. So on Thursday, the school board passed its proposed budget, and we found some efficiencies, and those efficiencies led us to savings of $6.8 million in 35 positions. One of the ways that we're going to have to move forward is by strategic use of reserves. Dr. Duran found that that was imperative for his budget as well, and he had baked in $8.5 million in use of reserves in his budget, and there are $21.2 million in reserves left that the school board may need to tap into to be able to close the gap. And here's what this looks like when you look at the revenues and the superintendent's revised proposed budget, where we are in our revised revenues for the school board, total expenditures in the superintendent's revised proposed, our savings, and that again leads us to about $14.9 million shortfall. And we have one request to continue with our collaboration with the county board. We would hope that you would consider supporting us with some one-time funds. You have done so in the past, and I know some of these issues are important to you. And so we would hope that you will consider them as you work on your budget. And one of the ones is summer school and to recover learning loss. And as I mentioned earlier, it's going to be a challenge for us to bring some of our staff back. And we hope that you can help us with some incentive payments to our staff to have them come in and teach in person. In addition to that, we mentioned the 2 buildings that we're opening up, Cardinal Elementary, previously known as Reed, and also the Education Center, and there are one-time costs there to open those buildings. You have been generous in the past and have supported us with opening new buildings in the past, and we hope that you can find some one-time funds to help us with that. And lastly, as we continue to try to support the needs of our diverse population, and understanding that some families may feel the need to continue to learn remotely in the fall, there are some of those one-time costs, again, which I've already outlined. Together, that is a $2.8 million request that we have for our colleagues on the county board, and trying to figure out how we can continue to collaborate to support our youngest Arlingtonians. And that leaves us, the school board, with a shortfall of a little bit over $12 million. And that is my one. Well, and let me just wrap up again where we started with our key takeaways. Again, COVID-19 pandemic emergency will continue to impact our school system, and we need to address it instructionally with social emotional supports and economically. Our budget, again, is focused on education and equity. The school board has found $6.9 million in proposed reductions that we've already incorporated. We are looking at limited additional resources to be able to bounce back. We are trying to figure out how to best compensate our employees in a way that keeps us competitive or returns us to being competitive. We are trying to preserve our quality programs and services, and we hope that we can continue and build upon a year of strong partnership with the county and schools. With that, I would like to be able to pass this over to Mr. Pretty, who will talk a little bit more about that collaboration. Mr. Pretty.
Thank you, Chair. So good afternoon. As I said earlier, this is my first joint school board, county board work session, so I'm excited, although I have seen many on TV. Now, in the ones that I've seen, there have been discussions about partnership, working together, future growth. And if there's one thing we've learned from the pandemic, it's that we need to be able to pivot quickly and change what we're doing on the fly. Now, that's pretty challenging for us, but if we can keep the lines of communication open and at the same time share ideas and provide feedback, well, we'll be in good shape. So my focus today is about transportation and how we can combine our staff's efforts to move forward, especially now. One of the results of the pandemic has been record low ridership on Metro, when, if you take a look last February, it was at extremely high levels of last year. Same with Metro buses, ART buses. If any of you have tried to purchase a bicycle from May to July last year, it was almost impossible because bicycles were in short supply. Modes of transportation have changed. So as we come out of the pandemic, we have to be quick and agile in our thought processes to see which modes of transportation are embraced in a post-COVID Arlington. Specifically, as it relates to the budget, the easiest example I can give is the late buses. As many of you know, or if you don't know, we had a Tier 2 cut in the proposed budget that, if taken, would eliminate late buses for athletics and other after-school activities. Now, I cannot stress about the importance of athletics and other after-school activities that help a student's mental health, along with providing them an outlet for after school to socialize, be part of a team, learn life skills. This was, in my opinion, a cut that we couldn't take. Luckily, my colleagues agreed, and in our proposed budget, we chose not to take the cut. Now, in deciding not to take that cut, we had our transportation department redo hub spots and drop-offs in order to maximize our operations. Here is where the partnership with the county comes in. So if we could work together to optimize routes throughout the county, from a cost benefit, it would help all of our bottom lines. And from a ridership point of view, it would help optimize the county infrastructure and routing. Also, as the liaison to the JCTC, which is the Joint Committee on Transportation Choices, I can tell you firsthand that the conversations between county staff and school staff have been productive, specifically in identifying intersections that are tricky for students to navigate. Now, whether it's George Mason and Wilson Boulevard that was discussed last month, or over by Kirkwood and Lee Highway with the month prior, if we can make the walk zone safer, then the result is that we can expand the walk zone area and we don't need as many buses. Additionally, if our intersections are improved, these locations can help on weekends too. Many of these locations are parks that are used in our community, that our community members use on weekends, so they can safely walk to these locations at all times of the week. So this is an added benefit for the community and the county. It's a win-win for both of us. So this takes an effort on both of our parts in order to succeed. So 3 things to take away from this is one, as we come out of the pandemic, let's discuss a solution not only to work with ART, but WMATA as well, to partner and find creative solution with ridership and the students. Number 2, let's use that partnership to help identify routes that can be used for the students' benefit. And number 3, let's create larger walk zones to limit the buses that the schools need. So the bottom line is that we need to partner to optimize that riding experience to benefit not only our students, but all of Arlington. So I look forward to working with you all, the county board, to be nimble and change with the end result that all Arlingtonians can benefit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pretty. We do appreciate you outlining the transportation needs and our ways that we can continue to address this with the county, especially building on the $100,000 that we put in last year's budget and continue to put in this budget to address ways that we can partner to use the ART system. I'd like to now turn to Ms. Diaz-Torres, who will talk about an issue that's important to all of us, and that is equity. Ms. Diaz-Torres.
Thank you, Chair O'Grady. And once again, thank you all for this wonderful work session. It's an honor and a pleasure to be joining you all for my first work session. The challenges that our county has faced over the past year have been, and I'll use an admittedly overused term, unprecedented. But the effort, the creativity, and the ingenuity that was presented by all of our staff from across the county services, including our schools, has also been unprecedented. As Mr. Pretty just mentioned, we have been forced to work harder and more collaboratively than ever before. And in the process, we've found new areas for partnership, for alignment, for coherence, and we have built that muscle of working together to solve problems. And so for me, going forward past this pandemic, one of the problems that's going to be at the forefront of all of our attention is equity. In the past year, APS has come farther than ever on this front, and I just want to share a couple of highlights. So first of all, we passed our first ever equity policy this year that outlines our vision for equity in schools. Over the coming months, we'll continue to build on that, and we'll build out the policy implementation procedures, the PIP, that will really bring that policy to life. Speaking of which, we hired and onboarded our CDEIO, who has developed a plan to turn our policy into actionable efforts, focus on addressing opportunity achievement gaps for our most vulnerable students. We also made significant inroads, as Chair O'Grady mentioned, in addressing the digital divide. We ensured that all of our students had access to devices and high-speed internet access that was necessary for them to access learning, and also provided their families with access to the internet in ways that they might not have had before. We are looking forward to continuing those efforts, but it's just the very beginning. And finally, most importantly, we really pivoted this year. We reimagined education and found ways to deliver equitable instruction to students of all ages and abilities. It's just the very beginning of this effort, as I said. The budget, as you saw in this presentation, is the next step our system needs to ensure that we can provide an equitable public education to all of our students. It's the next step that'll help us get closer to meeting each student by name and by need, no matter which school they attend. And that's really important. We want to make sure that our system is equitable no matter where you are, no matter the zip code, no matter the location, and no matter what identifying features you happen to carry with you. And so I want to call out a couple of specifics, and I pardon the redundancies. There are a lot of areas that Chair O'Grady has already highlighted that I'm just going to bring a little bit more color to. But I'm going to highlight 3 specific ones. First of all, this budget includes some really important stipends to support our school-based equity teams across the district. This year, each school began by naming an equity team that will be tasked with identifying gaps and priorities and needs that are specific to each school, and then help aggregate those up for the central DEIO office. They'll also help in pushing out resources and programming related to our equity initiatives. As I mentioned, this year was our building year. We used to focus on selecting the teams, getting them up and running. And so in the coming years, we'll begin to see the impact of their work. And we feel that it's incredibly important to provide them with the stipends necessary to do that work outside of work time and in addition to all of the other contract responsibilities that they have. Secondly, this budget includes increased staffing to support our students with disabilities. Chair O'Grady mentioned a couple of these, and to work alongside our staff members who have disabilities themselves. The investments include, but are not limited to, those ASL interpreters and cued language transliterators who are required by the ADA. They've also included additional staffings to address gaps in our service provision and address the increase in the number of students with disabilities who've enrolled in our schools. And then finally, we've also added new literacy and math screeners that are going to help us identify the needs of students with disabilities and of all of our learners to figure out who needs the additional support sooner and more accurately so we can intervene in a timely manner. And then the last feature that I want to talk about that's really important, at least to me personally, is the much needed addition of a director of English learners. As some of you know, we've not had a director of English learners heading that department. We've had supervisor level positions, but not someone who could have the vision and foresight to address the needs of those students. So as you know, we are currently under a settlement agreement with Department of Justice because of our inconsistent level of services for ELs in the past. A couple of pieces of information. As it stands today, according to our most recent debriefing report, nearly 40% of our English learners are not actually meeting annual benchmarks on language acquisition. And so all of us as a leadership team, the superintendent, the ELT, and the board, we are deeply committed to building out the English learner team that is going to be needed to establish the vision, the plan, and bring those inclusive research-based proven practices into our schools so that every single English learner receives the support that they need. We are also going to be investing significantly in translation to ensure that all families, no matter which language they speak, can access our services and understand what's going on in our schools. I could go through the entire budget line item by line item, and those of you who know that I'm a budget wonk know that I have, but I really just want to zoom out at this point and reiterate one key takeaway. We're doing a lot this year to address equity, but addressing equity is not a one-time expense. This is just the very beginning. And what we're aiming to do with this new policy, this leadership team, and these investments is to really break down the systems, the structures, the biases, and the norms that have been in place for decades. Changing that is not going to happen overnight, and we are going to continue to partner with you and need your collaboration as we invest in this work going forward over the next several years. And so with that, I'll turn this back over. I'm happy to continue to elaborate on how this budget addresses equity, but I wanted to give you those top points before I pass it over to the rest of my colleagues.
Thank you very much, Ms. Diaz-Torres, one of our budget wonks. For that, I'd like to now move on to Mr. Goldstein. Mr. Goldstein will talk to us a little bit about the future of APS and returning to full in-person learning. Mr. Goldstein.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Always a pleasure to join with my school and county board colleagues to continue to assure our successful future. Monique's asked me to give an overview of APS's future. I think the big takeaway themes here, the overarching themes are resilience, recovery, and equity and inclusiveness. So we have a very robust future. I'm going to break my little discussion into two parts, the near term and the longer term. In the near term, there are 5 subcategories. I'll come back to detail each one, but they are those things we are returning to, those actions to make our students whole following the pandemic year. The third subcategory is what we are continuing. The fourth is those new things that we'll be undertaking in the near term. And finally, the fifth subcategory is the actions that we've taken in previous budgets that have prepared us for today. So in the near term, we're going to be returning to 5 days in-person instruction. We'll be returning to sports and athletics and extracurriculars, and we'll be returning to extended day services. Those actions that we're going to take to make our students whole following the pandemic year, there's going to be a greater emphasis on social and emotional learning supports, as well as mental health supports and special ed recovery services. Also, we are planning for lower student-to-teacher ratio. We'll be adding counselors in this upcoming budget, this budget that we're talking about today, to achieve the standards of quality ratio that's been mandated by the state. Summer school, you've already heard about. and moving on to those continuing actions in our near term. So we will be continuing virtual instruction for those who opt for it, and we'll be adding a new position to manage our virtual schooling. Personal digital devices from pre-K all the way through 12th grade, we will be continuing those, and having those devices in the students' hands will enable us we will be ready to meet, God forbid, another pandemic. We will continue our emphasis on literacy. We are going to continue to meet the terms of the Department of Justice settlement. We're now in the second of 3 years of phasing that in. We will continue plans for our middle school and high school boundary readjustment processes. That'll take place this fall, but will become effective the following fall. That'll be in the fall of 22 for the 22-23 school year. And we are continuing the process of school moves. So the new activities we'll be undertaking in the near term include the equity audit that you heard about, and collaboration with county equity activities. We will be bringing on board an in-house counsel. We have a new assistant superintendent for facilities and operations to replace John Chadwick, who has recently retired. And this new assistant superintendent we'll have him on board next month. We are planning on a revised organizational chart that will have a chief academic officer, a chief operations officer, and a head of school support, collecting underneath that heading of various existing departments and sub-departments. We'll be completing the Ed Center, and we'll be opening Cardinal Elementary School on the location that used to be Walter Reed in Westover Village, and also Innovation Elementary School on the site that was formerly known as Key Immersion. And finally, we'll be undertaking compensation and budget studies. And then the actions that we've taken in previous budgets that have prepared us for now include the Arlington Tiered System of Support, the ATSS, and meeting the standards of quality ratios for psychologists and social workers that we have done in a phased process that we completed, I think, a couple of years ago. So moving to the longer term, we will be keeping and expanding virtual instruction in the APS model. We will be completing build out of the Career Center. We will be preparing for flatter growth than in the past, but still expanding enrollment in looking out over the 10-year horizon. We'll be continuing recruitment and retention of our greatest asset, which of course is high quality teaching staff. We will be doing a countywide elementary boundary process in the fall of 22. That will be effective the following fall. That'll be in school year 23-24. We are in the middle of our 6-year strategic plan, which will continue to drive our annual action plans. We'll have a greater implementation of hub stops for our school buses. And finally, we're going to have a stronger alliance between our information services department and a teaching and learning departments. So I know that was a lot. It was a lot to absorb. If you have questions on those, I'll be happy to lateral those balls over to the relevant experts who are also here on the call. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goldstein. And to wrap us up here, we are going to hear from our Vice Chair, Dr. Cannon, who will talk to us about our compensation challenges before going to your questions, County Board members. And we do appreciate your patience. Dr. Cannon.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Grady. And I'm kind of glad I got to go last because it gives me the chance to say that this is my 7th school board budget. It is by far the hardest, even harder than last year, because as you can tell by what you've heard already, we're building back. We know we need to work toward being sustainable again. But as you can also see, we really have an A team working on this. This is not just a wonky team, but an enthusiastically wonky team who are truly leading with heart as well as sharpened pencils. So there's some really good work that's been done and that we'll continue to do. And that's a little bit of my part of this. I want to tell you where we are with compensation, both in terms of how we're working on compensation in this budget, but also importantly, what we're doing to help get back on a sustainable path going forward. So you may remember that we had funded a compensation study last year, and it was in recognition of several things. One is the fact that we weren't in a sustainable situation with our enrollment growth. Enrollment means more staff, and staff means compensation. Compensation is 80% of our budget. And as Ms. O'Grady pointed out in her presentation, in the last 10 years during this rapid enrollment growth period, we have not been able to provide compensation according to how it was designed, which is to provide a step and a COLA. That's not sustainable. So we knew we needed to take a look at our compensation. We also knew that we weren't competitive across all of our categories, and our compensation study has now shown that to be true in a number of ways. So compensation, of course, is how we recruit and retain high quality staff. It's fundamental to keeping our school system strong, and going forward, we know we need to implement take a look at the results we have, implement them so that we can get back on track being both competitive as well as sustainable. So let me just tell you, the first part of the study was reported out to us in January. We have not been able to implement that yet. We need to fund the next part to help build our new scales. But basically, we learned some important things. We learned that a number of our salary scales are not up to market anymore. As Ms. O'Grady mentioned earlier, we were at one point one of the highest paying school systems in the region. Other school systems saw that and have been increasing their salaries. And so we no longer are. And we have a number of salary scales like our food, cafeteria workers, our clerical staff, and several other that we now know are below market. But let me talk specifically about the teachers who are the bulk of our staff. This is very interesting. It turns out that today, the first 8 or 9 years of our salary scale for teachers, whether bachelor's or master's, are actually under market. So that means when we're going out and recruiting new teachers, we're actually presenting lower salaries to people we're trying to hire than some of our neighbors. So the first 8 or 9 years of our salary scale are under market. But then 10 years and beyond, we've been above market. So this is affecting our recruiting. It is also affecting our sustainability. We're actually allocating a lot of our resources toward those long-term higher paid employees, and it's kind of an inefficient use of our resources. And that's a piece of what's caused us to be unsustainable. We heard a lot this year as we talked about our compensation scheme. And the first proposal that the superintendent brought us was a 2% COLA across the board. We heard a lot from our staff who, as you all know, are exhausted about the fact that many folks who've been with our system, especially those who've been with our system less than 10 years, have missed 4 steps. What that means is someone who's worked for APS for 10 years has been paid as if they've worked for APS for 6 years. And remember what I just said, that fewer than 8 or 9 years, they have been under market anyway. So we've kind of been a double hit on our less than 10-year staff. They've really been hit hard, and that's what brings us to the urgency of ensuring that we are providing a good compensation package this year. So our aim right now is two things. We have to compensate our staff. We wanted to build a step into our system. We wanted to help bring up some of those categories that are under market. But importantly, we also wanted to make sure that we weren't hindering what we need to do as we implement our compensation study. So the bottom line is we need to fund that study. That's in our budget. We designed something right now that will compensate everyone in our system, but not hinder what we need to do going forward. And then we are very much looking forward to working with you and with our staff. We're starting really next month. We will be hitting this compensation study hard and making sure that we will be implementing what we've learned to head into next year's budget. So there's a lot, stay tuned. There's a lot to do yet, but we are going to be working on this and working to get ourselves to a competitive place as well as a sustainable place. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cannon. And with that, I'd like to turn it back to Mr. DeFerrante, the chair of the county board, to move us forward. And I'd be happy to help get any questions answered from our county board colleagues.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, school board colleagues, for adding to the presentation that Ms. O'Grady, Chair O'Grady did. We will. There's a lot of information to absorb, and I know we'll have questions. I'll start with one and look for hands if as colleagues have questions. You mentioned, and this is kind of goes back to your presentation, Madam Chair, and that is you mentioned the survey that you've gone out as far as enrollment growth, and this just seems like a important but difficult question because the graph had us returning to a high level of enrollment next year. And certainly you have to have the teachers on board. I think that hiring occurs sort of now and you know, up through June or July, but not as much into August. Do you have a sense of, and maybe this is for the superintendent, of when you know the results of that survey as to who will be coming back, which students will be coming back? So we have a little better sense, if it's possible, to have a sense of enrollment growth.
Thank you, Chair DeFerrante. Yes, let's move over to Dr. Durant to answer that question. Dr.
Sure, thank you, Chair DeFerrante. So two things. There are two different surveys taking place. One is really an intent to return form, and we had 3,502 families who, since March of last year, have taken their students out of APS. So for those group of families, we are reaching out to them with an intent to return form that began at the beginning of April. In just 1 week, the first week, we did receive only 4% of those, so about 147 families did respond in the first week. 96% of them are planning to return. That's a very small number, only 4%. So that process will continue to take place through the end of April, where we will be gathering information on that intent to return form. In addition to that, there is a survey that will be going out to all of our families beginning next Monday, April 19th, for 2 weeks, where we will be asking families to choose which model that they would like to participate in the fall. So will it be the full 5-day in-person or the full 5-day virtual experience? And that will also help us for budgeting purposes. So two different surveys. That one we will have information on sometime in the middle of May. The intent to return form we'll also have at the beginning of May. But again, as of the first week, we had 4% respondents, and 96% of those, or 141 of them, have said that they would be returning.
Got it, great. So I'll pass to colleagues. I did have one. Do I have and I think I might have asked you this, Superintendent Duran, last year. Do I have the timing right on the hiring for teachers? I know that both boards have really wanted to make sure that we don't lay off employees, but I think you have to hire teachers for next fall before the budget is finalized. Do I have that right, or do you have some flexibility?
We do have staffing based on our enrollment projections, and that's why this year is going to be a little off with regards to how the staffing, whether it's for the in-person or the virtual, which is why that survey, some people have asked, why is he asking the survey so soon about next year? Well, it's all connected. So our staffing is currently happening as we speak. in terms of what we will need for our various schools and locations and programs. And then from there, we'll see what vacancies we might have based on that.
Thank you, Superintendent Duran, and I'll pass it, and I will start with Mr. Dorsey. I believe that's next, but we can also share as to who might have come before.
Well, to be fair, I just want to, if you want to go in order, Ms. Crystal, then Mr. Carantonis, and then me. So
go ahead, Ms. Crystal. Thank you, Mr. Dorsey, for getting me on in order and on time.
Thanks, colleagues. Appreciated that discussion about the surveys that will feed into the return to school. I'm sure receiving a survey with the 5-day in-person option was a welcome sight to some of our parents, although not all. One quick comment and then one question. The comment was just a real thank you to the points made by Dr. Cannonen with the salary studies. This is really complex work, as we know too on our side. There's really no tweaking within a salary system that doesn't cause some kind of consequence, right? We look to raise salaries to attract people at the beginning of their career. That causes compression, right? You bring people up along the way with one increase or a cost of living increase, and as Dr. Cannonen shared, that means people's lifetime career movement is different. And so I know how complex this is. I really appreciate that you all are undertaking the study and seeking to be transparent with us about it. And I'll look forward to some real conversations. I know we've talked for a long time, for example, about how APS has been fortunate over time to draw more experienced educators. They may be new to APS, but they're not new to the profession. And so I think we as a community have had some comfort with the fact that our year one teaching compensation may not be the highest in the region, since we don't have a lot of year one educators in APS. But I suspect there are a deep number of complexities that affect and drive and shape those conversations. So looking forward to being involved and learning as you all learn. One very, I think, straightforward question about one of the asks that you all have of sort of the remaining needs in the budget: one-time money for the opening of facilities at the new Cardinal Elementary School and the Ed Center. Can you all just share a little more? I think together those things are about $1.5 million, or those asks are $1.5 million. What all is involved in that? How that differs from the capital budgets? Or capital project budgets for each of those improvement opportunities, what else that would be paying for. I'd love some insights into that. And I see Ms. Peterson has magically appeared, so we'll look forward to that answer. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Peterson.
Thanks, Ms. O'Grady, Ms. Crystal. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, what we have in our operating budget are those things that cannot be funded by the bond funding that we use for our capital improvement projects. So things like furniture and equipment, the startup of the library, all of the things that you need in the art room, musical instruments, all of those kinds of things are funded in our operating budget versus the capital improvement budget, which funds things like casework that is built into the building, but not the teacher desks or the teacher file drawers or any of those other things.
Okay, thank you. That's a pretty straightforward answer and helpful.
Great. We may try and come back for one more round, or just depending on timing. But Mr. Carantonis, thank you, Ms. Crystal. You're on mute. You're on mute.
I'm on mute. Now it's better, right? So I was thanking everybody for a presentation of budget that it's really intriguing because it's multifaceted. It has many moving parts, and I understand that there are a lot of challenges there. I see that. And I want to go exactly in one that concerns me the most. I've seen that you're dedicating $8.5 million, a little bit more than $8.5 million from your reserves to serve this budget. So what is the game plan there? What happens next year, for example? This is mostly what we call ongoing funding. This we will find it again next year. So what's the strategy of using reserves to make ends meet this year with regards to the future?
Thank you, Ms. Peterson.
Thanks, Ms. O'Grady. The $8.5 million in reserves that we've used in the superintendent's proposed budget has been used exactly as we have over the last number of years since we've had reserves. We fund all of our one-time costs in the budget with those reserves. And then we use the reserves to help us offset up to 50% of some specific ongoing costs. And those are things like debt service, our VRS increases, and our compensation increase for the following year. This is one of the reasons that we haven't, I believe that the school board and the superintendent haven't dedicated the remaining reserves to filling the gap, because we understand that if you do fill that gap with one-time funds, then you're going to be in a cliff the following year, because you won't have those one-time funds again in the budget. And so we've been very strategic about how we've used those funds over the last, it's been more than 10 years, I believe, since we've been using reserves in this way. But the reality is that we're facing something very difficult this year, much more difficult than we've seen in the past.
Okay, so we're not going to miss that money next year, or we will, but we will be in a better shape, hopefully, right? Okay.
Yes, Mr. Karantonis, if I can just add on to that, unfortunately we are having to look at dipping into our reserves, because this is really an unprecedented situation, and we need to move forward and be able to fill the gap and meet the needs of our students. And so the school board will be looking at dipping into reserves in this year to make up for that funding. But I think that you do make an important point, which is that we can't always continue to dip into our reserves because if we continue to do so, we may not have the reserves that we need. So we're having to make really important choices and think about how we're going to continue to have sustainable budgeting in the future, which is why we do have that budget study and the compensation study to help us do so. So we appreciate the question.
Thank you, Chair O'Grady.
Thank you, Mr. Karantonis and Chair O'Grady. Mr. Dorsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as it happens, I want to pick up from there. This is going to sound accusatory. It's not meant to. It's just to really set the stage for what I hope is our ongoing collaboration and partnership. But as we've looked at your FY22 situation, the American Rescue Plan, fortunately, is coming to the rescue and providing essentially a one-to-one replacement for the expected revenues that you're not going to be receiving from both the county and the state. It's beautiful how that's almost a one-to-one. But then you have your compensation issue, which you're addressing this year, that exists despite the fact that, at least on an average teacher basis, Arlington County is devoting more to its instructional personnel than just about every other Northern Virginia jurisdiction. But as you've outlined, that's created issues of market competitiveness within the scale that you're going to study. All of the things that you've outlined strategically as growth initiatives over the years have either been deferred or implemented at a slower time frame. And as Mr. Karantonis noted, you've had this multi-year dip into reserves in order to meet the budget needs. This all indicates a real structural deficit problem. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about how we might think about addressing that collaboratively. Any structural issue, clearly there's a way to think about what you can do on your side, what we can do on our side, but most effective in dealing with a huge structural issue is for us to figure out how to do this together. And I'm presuming that this annual process where we just sort of talk about it as we lead up to the budget is not really going to get it done, because functionally all that leaves you with is the tool of asking the county, which makes up 80% of your revenue, to pick up the difference. And that's really not going to be the way we meet these huge challenges that you outlined. So thoughts on that?
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Dorsey. We do appreciate your perspective on the issue, and we welcome your request to have continued conversations with the county board outside of a 1-2 hour meeting event every year to try to figure out how we can address what seems to be some structural challenges in our budget. We do understand and agree that there are some structural challenges as we try to continue to meet the needs of all of our students in a system where we believe that our Arlington community expect high quality and a very robust educational experience for our students. And as we're looking at the challenges that we face to ensure that all of our students who currently fall within opportunity gaps also need to be receiving the experience that some of our other students are having, that adds a complexity to us meeting our budget challenges. So I will thank you for your questioning of that, and look forward to us having more conversations about how we can collaboratively work towards trying to meet some of those structural challenges, which will also be informed by a future budget study, as well as the compensation study as well. So we appreciate you opening the door to that, and we look forward to having some conversations about that. Dr. Duran, would you like to say anything in addition to that?
No, I think that to your point, that's good ongoing conversation that needs to be held.
Appreciate that, Mr. Dorsey. Thank you, Dr. Duran.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Dorsey, and the thoughts, Madam Chair. Ms. Garvey.
Thank you. I have two questions that kind of follow along the same bit as well. Can you pull up slide 10 from your presentation? Is it possible for you all to pull that one up? It's the enrollment and cost per pupil slide, because that's kind of what I wanted to look at, actually both of those lines, and talk about a little bit with some questions. My questions maybe are not too easy to answer, but at least I'd like to sort of broach the subject. The first, a quick question. I assume the slope on the enrollment, you're just continuing the slope that was at 2019, and sort of assuming that the pandemic didn't happen, that the same growth pattern will obtain next year as it would have in 2019. Is that correct?
Dr. Duran, would you like to address that?
Yes, so essentially based on the 2019 data, that is what we're doing there in terms of the projection. Also, as we heard from our demographer, which was very important information, is in 2016, where we saw a very large birth rate of students who would be entering kindergarten. It was a higher birth rate than normal. So that also took into some consideration the account for that enrollment projections.
Okay. Thank you. That's good to know. I mean, I will just venture, and we won't know. I suspect it's not going to recover completely as much as you think it will. And I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit, what your plans are if that doesn't happen, because I just think we won't have that bounce back. It will eventually get there, but I'm just thinking it's unlikely to have a complete recovery in 1 year as if the pandemic hadn't happened. That's just sort of my, there's no mathematical formula or anything behind that. It's just sort of my gut feeling about how it's going to happen. That looks like a pretty big dip and unlikely to completely correct that much. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, and you see the big dip, as I mentioned earlier, was 3,500 students who did leave the system, and that's why we're really trying to understand for this return to intent form, how many of them would be coming back to the system. We heard anecdotally a variety of things, but certainly what we are trying to gather is how many may return. We had, and again, in the first week, 96% who responded said they would be returning. So we want to be mindful of that, because if we're not planning for that, what in effect could happen is then we will have larger class sizes in a time when we don't need larger class sizes, right after having come out of this year where learning may need to take place. And the projections really do expect enrollment to be lower than the 2019 projections slightly. So we followed that model, but it is still a little bit lower. We didn't go the full amount, considering that we may have had some changes in terms of who had left the system and would not be returning. So while it is based on the 2019, it is a little bit lower than exactly. We didn't use the exact 2019 and say, okay, let's just forget 2020 occurred and do that. We based it on that, but it is a little bit lower.
Okay, thank you. That helps, and I understand you can't. It's going to be so hard to know. My guess is those that are going to respond to your survey are those that are coming back, and if they're not coming back, they may or may not respond. But that's and we won't know until after the budget's adopted. So I know it puts you in a tough situation. The other line I wanted to talk about actually was the cost per pupil. Is that okay if I follow? Would you like to do on the round, Mr. Chair?
Sure. Go ahead, Ms. Garvey.
I'll just start that. Those will be my second question. I won't come around again. And that was the one on the cost per pupil. And I think this is maybe for Dr. Duran. I'm not sure. Do you see a possibility that as you do more virtual, and because next year you will have some students coming back virtual, that you might be able to start to address this sort of constant increase in the cost per pupil, and that going virtually over time might manage to somewhat lower the cost per pupil? Have you thought about that? I mean, that's kind of a long range planning, but we are talking a little bit about trends and where we're all headed.
Well, as we think about virtual, I still have a cost to it, and we still have staffing required. So don't know how that would be a major savings in terms of that component as we move forward. A lot of the cost per pupil here is based upon the compensation of our staff. And as we continue to invest, as we should and as we must invest in our staff to make sure that we have that market rate and above, really should be above market to have our be competitive. That's where I believe you're going to see the cost per pupil continue to increase, and that's what we're looking for long term in terms of why those increases might happen.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I'm assuming over time there may be some different ways, particularly with older students, to deliver the instruction that might enable with virtual, enable one very good teacher to at least deliver the instruction. There'd be follow up and a lot of other things. I'm not saying there's no cost. Right. I'm just assuming that it might, and maybe you over time save some bricks and mortars because everybody doesn't have to be sitting at a desk all the time. So.
Yeah. And certainly, I think those costs, we would see the potential savings. But again, the bulk of what you see in the cost for people is the staffing piece that goes with it. And we would still have a large staffing component to the virtual piece. We wouldn't want to create very large class sizes virtually. First, we want to maintain that same level. Right.
And unless, of course, you started changing, which I've talked with some about the flip on, and maybe that it won't save the flip where the instructions delivered and then the follow-up, the homework's done in the classroom or much more individually, which might be a different model. But anyway, I'm just kind of tossing out some ideas because I think we are, looking at a different way possibly of delivering instruction that might help some of these trends. Maybe won't, but I do understand the cost of the teachers is crucial, and that's your outstanding variable in how the quality of the instruction. So thank you. That's it, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Thank you,
Ms. Garvey, and for the questions and discussion. And I see Ms. Diaz-Torres has appeared. Did you have a comment you wanted to add on that one? You're okay. All right, Mr. Dorsey, go ahead.
Thank you. For my round two, I'll go back to the specific request for this year. Let me just say that, one, I appreciate you're all confining your ask to things that could be fulfilled with one-time funds. We very much appreciate that. And thank you for the earlier conversation about the costs at Reed. I'd like for you to maybe speak a little bit more about the fall distance learning plan that you have in terms of who you expect to participate in it and what that structure is going to look like.
Dr. Duran.
So the fall distance learning plan, what we have will be 5 full days of synchronous learning. We anticipate many families are still going to be interested in participating in that because of safety and health considerations. We still have some families with students who have medical conditions who do not feel comfortable yet returning physically to 5 full days. We have some communities, as we know, in Arlington, certain zip codes where we've seen that COVID has had a much larger impact. And we've seen that those communities still aren't comfortable yet returning to 5 full days for a variety of reasons. So initially, I think a big bulk of that will change when we do see our health conditions and what's occurring in the community change with regards to COVID transmission. And obviously, there's been discussions about vaccines potentially going down to 12-year-old and up. Once we start to see some of those come to fruition and more students perhaps being vaccinated, more families may be comfortable. But we've also seen in this virtual opportunity time where a lot of our students have been successful in this environment, and it's been a thriving learning experience. As one parent talked to me the other day about her child really being successful for the first time, she said, and he's in 10th grade, and the first time she sees his light bulb come on, to use her words. So we do know that there will be some families partaking in that, but essentially the 5-day, and that's the survey will tell us a lot more about how many families. We're kind of basing a lot of what we've seen on 2/3 or more returning to in-person. That's what we've seen thus far in most of our surveys. So I anticipate it would be at least that, if not more, a little bit more being in person and the remainder being virtual. The virtual experience will be exactly the same learning that students need to have during the regular day, and it will be synchronous.
Well, thank you, Dr. Duran, and you actually got it, why I asked the question within the context of the budget. So, it's being requested as a one-time, and presumably that's because we expect the circumstances that will cause people to look for it are going to end. And in fact, that end could actually come before the fall if, in fact, the Pfizer vaccine is made available for 12 to 15s. But you also highlighted that this maybe has become a model for dual mode instruction, in which case it's not a one-time expense. It may be something that you all have to build in to your base, which is, again, another element for the structural issue which we may have to deal with. So I'm just wanting to surface that a little bit.
And I'd like to clarify the request for one time there is not the full cost of the full-time distance learning. Those are actual one-time costs of things like manipulatives, toolkits, things of that nature. Our staffing and some of the ongoing costs that would be a part of offering the full-time distance learning are not a part of that request and are separate. So these are just things that we would see one time needing to purchase for those families that would be participating this coming year. If we were to replicate this in future years, we would continue to have those same one-time costs, albeit I believe they would be much smaller. But that is the ask from the county, is just on those items that are one-time, mostly toolkits and manipulatives for our younger learners that they would need to have in place. Because the technology and most of the other things we've already purchased, those are ongoing costs, right, for the technology pieces. The staffing that would take place is not included in that. That's separate and some part of our ongoing budget. And there's no FTE request, even though there are FTEs that are going to be required for the full distance learning model.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dorsey and Superintendent Duran. First, I think that probably on the one-time costs, we'll want to do some follow-up just to get a little bit of the background to the four different components to the one-time, and we'll seek to do that separately via follow-up if we can. And then I just want to, I'm mindful of time because we have to discuss the county budget as well. But I will say, appreciated both your comments, your question, Mr. Dorsey, and your thoughts, Chair O'Grady, about the structural work. And there are many different areas where we could try to do the ongoing work to work together on those structural questions. The 2-hour work session once a year is not sufficient. And I think we all know that we probably need to spend time as we get out of COVID on some of those structural questions that Mr. Dorsey was surfacing. How we do that, there'll be certainly some staff on both sides that we would want to engage, perhaps in smaller conversations that might lead to some progress. That's a thought over time, but certainly appreciate everyone's questions. Each of the school board members' additions, we've all got notes to be following up in our individual conversations that we seek to do on a regular basis. So with that, I will thanks again to the chair and the school board for the presentation and Dr. Duran, and I will ask the county manager to come and give us some context about the current stage of where the county budget is, because the county board has not yet acted on the full budget. It's still the manager's proposal, though we have had about 8 or 9 work sessions to this point. Mr. Manager.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the County Board, Madam Chair, members of the School Board. Good to see you all, and Dr. Duran. First, before I move to the slides, I did want to open up by saying that I'm incredibly proud of what we've been able to do in the past year. We continue to provide all our county services, whether it was permitting or maintaining our water and sewer services. And in many cases, we did it in a completely new way. Never been done before. And we were able to literally change the way we perform our services. Then on top of that, we were lucky or unlucky enough, depending on your perspective, to have a whole new set of services we were asked to provide. And that often meant in the delivery of vaccines or doing contact tracing, staff were asked, and in many cases had absolutely no choice to show up and put themselves in harm's way to provide those services. And we did all that while our revenues in many cases cratered or did come back to a certain degree. So very proud with that. With that as background, I did want to start off with just a quick summary of what we did related to the pandemic. And I think Emily or Richard, if you can pop up the slides. Yeah, that'd be great. Just a little bit on the pandemic response by numbers. This is where we stand as of today. We're close to about 45,000 tests administered. We've had at various times as many as 100, now about 80 people doing contact tracing, and we've traced over 14,000 cases. We have 3 county managed vaccine sites, and 40% of those Arlington residents who are in the age cohort of 16 and above have received at least 1 dose. Okay, so that is that's really good. Obviously, it doesn't include the bulk of the population that Arlington Public Schools is responsible for, those kids 16 and under. But that's sort of where we are. We had to, let's go to the next slide. I had to put this in here because I know that school board member Vice Chair Cannonen was out with our board members Katie Crystal and Takis Karantonis on Saturday, and we were able to do an enormous amount of service in the community, put 4,000 flyers out. You can't drive down a street in Arlington without seeing a sign and about signing up, and we're really urging people to get ahead, go out and sign up for that. Next slide, just real quickly, summarizes, and I'm not going to read each of these for you, but it's here for you to go back and take a look at all the services that we continue to provide over the past year. And if you take a look here, not only our regular and not to be forgotten public safety services, but all the work we did with flexibility for pickup and drop-off zones, temporary seating areas, the work that we did with schools on food distribution and on digital equity with hotspots with the public schools, and then the work we did with our business community and not to also to be forgotten, the community support through Thrive and our other organizations. So a little bit about our budget. This budget is a budget that's meant to bridge from where we were in the pits of the pandemic, hopefully to a place where we'll be better off. So we have taken the unusual step in this case of using one-time revenues of about $16 million to fill a hole, which we consider to be temporary. And following county board guidance, we try to be adaptable and flexible in our proposal. We also have added additional funding to address some of those challenges identified by our police practices group, which include efforts in mental health and also the potential standing up of a civilian review board. We are addressing our stormwater needs, and then, of course, the needs of our county workforce, which are paramount. Consistent with county board guidance, the real estate tax rate remains constant. We have proposed an increase to the stormwater rate, though. Let's go on to the next slide. I talked a little bit about what happened with our revenues. The overall tax revenue for county and therefore schools, since you get 47% of tax revenue, were essentially flat. Overall tax revenues went up 0.1%. And I've said often in the past, in a sort of regular year, you hope to see a 3 to 4% growth just to keep pace with the cost of doing business. The place where we did surprisingly well was in residential real estate assessment. Commercial went down 1.4%. Well, I think we'll continue to see pressure in our commercial real estate market in the future. We also, you can see for our consumption taxes, were the places where we were for hotel and meals most severely hit, given the impacts of the pandemic. And we also did not collect much in the way of parking meter revenue or recreation fees or transit revenue. So those are the things that really affected us. We have here, so I apologize for overstating your number a little bit on the American Rescue Plan. We were rounding numbers here, but Arlington County government is going to be getting $46 million in 2 tranches, $23 million coming in May next month, and then $23 million the following year. So that was very welcome relief. The one thing that we're challenged with, which is a very significant challenge, is the guidance from the federal government about how we can use those funds. If you were following the legislation through the Congress, you knew the House had a very expansive use of those funds, and the Senate added language that has really limited the use of those funds. So we're keeping that in mind as we go forward and offer some suggestions on how to use it. Again, let's go to the next slide. Very broadly, here are the numbers. About a $1.4 billion budget, county operating budget, $834 million. Our schools transfer, which is our single biggest expenditure, around $530 million. And I think it may have been referenced by Chair O'Grady that we have provided some additional revenue at third quarter review as we have gone back and reviewed the assumptions we made back in January and February about our revenues. It turns out that our business professional occupational license taxes, which is ongoing revenue, which has been doing better than we thought. And out of that, close to $2 million in additional revenue, which we have shared with you, which I know you've incorporated in the school board's adopted version of the budget. Let's go to the next slide. This is one of my favorite slides because I always like reminding, I know the school board knows about this. I just like to remind the community that on top of that money that we just talked about, the $530 million, there is approximately, and we try to be conservative on this, each year, estimated this year for fiscal 22, there's about $15 million worth of services we provide to Arlington Public Schools, but is funded on the county side of the budget. And the examples we list here are not all of them, but I'll give you some examples. The Early Childhood Education and Parenting Program, school resource officers, I know that's currently under review by the school board about the future of that, crossing guards, youth programming, our public health service where we have nurses and clinic aides for all the schools, and then a series of other items that are listed here. That comes to more than $15 million every year, which is vital for keeping the schools going. And that is something we're happy to do. So the challenge on our side for balancing the budget was we did have higher than anticipated real estate assessments, was great. We still had to figure out how to do cuts. We still had to figure out how to run a government. As I said, run the government we always run, and then potentially, and then a whole new set of services on top of that, with the challenges of one-time funding and the choices that we needed to make with that. So let's go to the next slide. We made somewhere between $16 and $17 million in reductions. We did not eliminate any filled positions, but at the same time, we have taken 56 positions out of the budget, reducing capacity that was available if we did have the revenue. And I'm not going to read each of these to you, but you can see as you go through there, that's just an example of some of the reductions that we have taken and some of the facilities that we're delaying to reopen, and more to come on that in the next slide. You, as schools did highlight, we also have done this on a continuing basis. I'm not sure that I've had a year when I've been manager where things have actually gone as well as they did the 5 years before that. So I don't know if there's a link there, but we've been doing cuts fiscal 19, fiscal 20. You can see that we've eliminated a number of services, not just trimmed them, but for example, eliminated bus routes, contracted out pharmacy services, eliminated programs that had been here for many years. Let's go to the next slide. This is what is right now with the county board advertised tax rate, assuming that that is the rate that is adopted. The impact on the average homeowner, you can see here down at the bottom, will be paying a bill of about $382 more this year over last year. Included in that is a lot of information. For example, on our refuse fee, we're able to keep that flat, but at the same time provide additional services for composting for county residents. I did not spend a lot of time, and I'm not sure it's particularly appropriate here, but when it comes to our federal dollars, we have been spending a lot of time trying to figure out which of those federal dollars under the American Rescue Plan can be used to fill in some of those cuts that we laid out. And that's been a subject of conversation with the county board, and that will be a subject of conversation in the upcoming work sessions this week. This is the calendar. I want to apologize for not putting the premier event, which is today's work session, on the calendar, but we are at April 12th. You can see that the county board can adopt as early as the 17th, but probably will do so on the 20th. And on May 6th, the school budget would be adopted. So with that, that concludes my presentation, and I'm going to turn it back to our chair, Mr. DeFerranti.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartz, for the presentation and the context. We will now open it to school board member questions regarding the county budget. As we do, I think those who have watched our 7, I think is the precise number of work sessions, there has been some shift because from the manager's proposed budgets, there are items that have come up over the last week where I at least am confident that there will be some additional funding because the manager's budget was proposed fully before the American Rescue Plan passed. So there's, those who are following, there's cooperative extension, and then there's the libraries that we're going to try to put back in the coming work sessions tomorrow, Thursday, as we finalize this in advance of a week from Tuesday. So with that context, hope that's helpful to school board members. Madam Chair, over to you and school board members for questions.
Thank you, Chair DeFerranti. School board colleagues, will you please indicate via raised hand mechanism if you have a question for our county board colleagues? Mr. Goldstein.
Thank you. Am I here? Yeah, here I am. Okay. Thank you. It's not a question. I do want to compliment that slide that Mark put up that he said was his favorite slide, because those facts are often lost, within the community about the additional support that the county gives to our students and our teachers and, APS in general. And I thought it was a great slide. It's informative and it's concise. And I do appreciate, his highlighting it and including it in the presentation, which I thought was also very good, very concise and meaty in terms of information. So I just wanted to compliment that and say thank you.
Thank you very much. I see that Ms. Diaz-Torres has a question. Ms. Diaz-Torres.
I'm trying to make sure I've pressed the correct combination of buttons. Thank you all, and thank you, Mr. Schwartz, for the great presentation. As someone who's been an observer of both budgets for many, many years, it's great to see how we're talking about it in a very symbiotic way in this particularly challenging moment. I actually want to echo back on that same exact slide. I think it's really critical to understand if the slide could actually be brought up, that would be really helpful. There are a lot of the services that are listed on there that have become incredibly critical for our families. And when we look at families and as students as not just, there we go. When we look at families and students, not just in the one service, the one entry point of where they're receiving services, but when we look at the full wraparound nature of all the services that we're providing them, whether it's on the county side or on the school side, it's really important to see that commonality, and also recognize that it's particularly for those $15 million in county services that you all are providing on your end, we're not necessarily seeing that direct alignment with the quantity of students that are there. And so to the comments that were made earlier about the need to talk collaboratively about how we rethink and reimagine and revision what our budget is going to be and structure is going to be going forward, I think it's going to be absolutely critical that we take a look at where this collaboration is, and particularly the services that are on this slide, and the intersections across both sides, to figure out what the sustainable solution is going to be going forward. At the end of the day, APS's obligation is always going to be to serve the students that come in our door. We are a public school system, and no matter how many numbers we might predict, if we get more students than that, if we get an extra 100 students, we have an extra 100 students that we need to educate. And so our responsibility as a board is to make sure that we're communicating with you all what those needs are, and we figure out what the way, going forward, what the solution is to do that. that in a collaborative way, maintaining these services and maintaining this connection going forward. So thank you all for that. And that was not a question, it was more of a comment, but if anyone else has a reaction to it or wants to continue to add to it, feel free to do so.
Then with that, I would move to our Vice Chair, Dr. Cannon. Dr. Cannon.
Sure. Thank you, Ms. O'Grady, and thank you, Mr. Schwartz, for that presentation. I also wanted to harken back to one of the slides, and it was kind of the revenue sharing slide that showed the kind of county bucket and then the amount that's allocated toward the schools. And I just wonder, probably Mr. Schwartz, if you could just talk a little bit more about the rules underlying the amount of the transfer. We know it's our revenue sharing agreement. It's 47%, but when you look at those numbers, of course, that's not 47% on this slide, I don't think. So could you just talk a little bit about revenue sharing, how that works from your perspective in terms of what the different buckets you're looking at are? And also, I think if you want to recall a little bit, I think perhaps you've been you worked with the county back when there were other revenue sharing agreements that maybe were based on different factors. And I wonder if you just have any thoughts to share about how that's worked over time, especially given the fact that our enrollment growth has grown. I think it's almost 47% in the last 10 years.
So thank you for
on the spot, Mr. Schwartz.
No. Thank you for that question, Dr. Cannon. And I know you and I have had many spirited conversations on just this subject, but the 47.3% figure is actually the percentage of tax revenue that is generated by Arlington residents that is shared with schools. And that is based, it has been for the last 4 years, on a retrospective basis based on an adopted budget. So this 47.3% is based on the percentages that were reflected in the adopted fiscal 21 level. And that is a derived percentage and just carried forward each year. There's a long history starting back in the year 2001 when the revenue sharing agreement first went into place. It was essentially based on a number of students, and the revenue sharing arrangement did falter a bit because it was based on the premise that when student enrollment dropped, the level of money going from the county to the schools would drop. Some of your predecessors on the school board did not realize that might happen, so it got a little bit shaky and it got rewritten. And it's been rewritten, I think, at least 3 times since then. There isn't actually a full written agreement on it as much as there is a set of principles that have been agreed to. And so I guess I would leave it at that. The reason why historically the non-tax revenue hasn't been shared, I'll give you an example, would be that most of those revenues are used on our end to support the underlying programs. For example, if we get revenues in for a parks program, it goes to pay for those programs. If we get a revenue in, for example, from parking meters, it goes to support those kinds of programs. So there is a lot of, I think, some good logic as to why we share tax revenues, which are essentially what the county board gets to allocate in a way where it isn't directed. So that's just the basic history on it, but I will just leave it at that before I say anything else that will entertain you.
Thank you.
And thank you for that answer, Mr. Schwartz. And I'd now like to go to Mr. Pretty.
Thank you, Chair O'Grady. I guess more of a couple comments. As it was noted, I think by Ms. Crystal, but the overall theme that we are not going to magically go back to pre-COVID numbers in the next year, understanding that. So it's nice that we are embarking on this journey together. As Ms. Diaz-Torres pointed out about the wraparound services, I hope we can be flexible partners so we can manage that post-COVID Arlington and work on that together and keep moving forward. And also, as it relates to Mr. Dorsey, I hope we can work together to discuss the structural piece and figure out a solution, so to speak, so we can move forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pretty. And I just quickly wanted to acknowledge the work that the county's been doing to make sure that we have vaccinations going to and across our community, and how important that has been for our staff so that we can safely return to the buildings and be able to bring our students back with our staff feeling much more safety and in place. So I just want to thank you for that. And I do recognize that we may be running short on time. So with that, Mr. DiFerente, I'll pass it back to you.
No, thank you, Madam Chair, for that note, as we put ourselves, all of us, in context to think of the very difficult year this has been. So we will go next to our Teen Network Board, and then we're going to have the Partnership for Children, Youth, and Families. But as we do, I just wanted to think about 6 or 7 groups that underlie this. There are our nurses, our teachers, our parents, our public safety officers, our cafeteria workers, and our custodians who have been working really hard this year. And there are also our students and our taxpayers who need our commitment. So if we think of those groups in the terms of, as we're finalizing our budgets, we may not all in our community agree, but there is much work to do, and each of those groups of individuals has been heroes in the last year in a lot of ways. So now we will turn to the subject of so much of our work, which is the Teen Network Board. And we have a couple of our leaders there, Yasmina Mansour and Ava Boston will present. And we also have support from staff. And I know that Ms. Crystal has, at the end of this, will have thoughts as one of our lead liaisons for our board. But I think we're going to start with, is it Yasmina?
Yeah, good afternoon, board members. My name is Yasmina Mansour. I'm a junior at Yorktown High School and one of the overall co-chairs of the Teen Network Board. It's our privilege to present before you today to share with you the work of the Arlington Teen Network Board, or as we call it, the TNB.
Hi everyone, my name is Ava Boston and I am the other overall co-chair of the Teen Network Board and also a junior at Yorktown.
We just wanted to start with a quick overview of the TNB. The TNB is a county commission that strives to strengthen the youth voice in Arlington. We strive to support other youth-serving agencies and programs by working together as partners to join all voices for the overall common good of our community and to promote the skills of future leaders from and for the county.
So the TNB has 5 subcommittees to accomplish these goals, and those committees are communications, drug and alcohol prevention, also known as DAP, volunteering, internships, community service, and employment, also known as VICE, and the Healthy Relationships Task Force, which is called HRT, and peer-to-peer.
The VICE committee serves to research, propose, and implement opportunities in that include volunteer, internships, community service, and employment as it pertains to youth.
The peer-to-peer committee centers around healthy relationships between youth, improving mental health, and raising awareness around mental illnesses.
The communications committee serves as the social media manager and is in charge of community outreach.
And the drug and alcohol prevention committee focuses on reducing youth abuse of substances and alcohol in Arlington.
The final committee is HRT, which is new this year, and it is focused around teaching teens about healthy relationships, sexual health, and consent.
So this year, Yasmin and I's main goal when we became overall co-chairs was to further equity within the TNB. And we would also like to see this reflected in the county budget, and that's why the TNB supports the county decision to continue equity training for all county leaders and staff. Moreover, we want to support and emphasize the importance of digital equity in the budget to ensure that all teens and their families continue to have access to education, health services, and more.
In tangent to equity work, we also want to voice our support for the allotted budget for the continuation of restorative justice work. We believe it should become a fixture for Arlington's conflict and crisis response, since it has shown to substantially reduce repeat offending, be more equitable, and involve community members to reduce overall harm.
We believe that the budget should be increasing and not decreasing for the Department of Environmental Science Services. Arlington has committed itself to be carbon neutral by 2050, and this cannot be achieved without persistent and strict measures. It's becoming more clear day to day that the importance of actively working through climate change and the consequences that climate change could have.
We believe the programs we've outlined will further the overall equity, inclusion, and accessibility of Arlington. We hope the board will take what we said into consideration.
Moreover, we want to stress our appreciation for the autonomy that the board grants us and hopefully will continue to grant us despite changes within the Partnership for Children, Youth, and Families.
On behalf of the entire Teen Network Board and our Youth Outreach Coordinator, Siobhan Grayson, we thank you for your invitation to this meeting, and we look forward to our continued relationship.
You two have done what I just did not do, which is unmuted yourself appropriately and offered great thoughts and feedback. Thank you, Ms. Mansour, Ms. Boston, and yes, for sure, Ms. Grayson, for your support of the Teen Network Board. I will send it. I know that I can imagine all school board members would have a thought, but I'll start with Ms. Crystal, who helps lead our work with the Teen Network Board.
Well, thanks for the privilege of going for first, and Ms. Boston and Ms. Mansour, thanks for the privilege of getting to liaise with you all. It's great to see you here, and thank you for the incredibly thoughtful recommendations that you and your colleagues on the TNB have surfaced, ranging from restorative justice to climate justice. I think it really shows these comments reflect the full scope of interests and issues that the TNB work on. I just wanted to lift up and particularly thank you both as leaders and the TNB in general for the role that you have played in bringing youth voice to a variety of issues. As I think many of my colleagues know, our peer youth advocacy and prevention work under Project Peace has recently been folded into and embraced by the TNB. We have also turned to the TNB to help us identify youth liaisons to efforts like the Complete Count Committee, now the Complete Vaccination Committee, as Ms. Cannon and Dr. Cannon knows, to our planning exercises like the future of the Career Center and others. And so you've played such an extraordinary role, not only in the leadership within the TNB structure, but helping lift up other youth leaders and identify ways that their voices can be included. We're so grateful to you both. Thank you for the excellent suggestions for our consideration. I think we will all take them to heart, and I think we're already working on a couple of them. And I just, Ms. Grayson, who remains, not to pick favorites within the institution of county and schools government, but one of the best staff members we've got. The fact that you have been silent on this call, I think reflects your very philosophy about youth leadership. And we are so fortunate to have you backing these amazing young people. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Ms. Crystal. I'm mindful that school board members that was focused on the county budget, but you all get the privilege of hearing students way more often than we do. And it's a reminder that adults could do well to listen a little more and to perhaps talk a lot less. So, Madam Chair, unless you have thoughts, we do have the partnership that is coming up next. And but want to give you the opportunity, if you did, I know that set of recommendations was more focused on the county budget, and you guys get to hear often from students. So
may I just say really quickly how proud we are of our own APS students to bring forth such thoughtful suggestions as we look to the future. We do appreciate their look at the environment, equity, and the desire to bring us together as a community around restorative justice. And we actually also have a position in our budget to support that work on the school side. So couldn't be more proud of our own students and our Arlington representatives here today. So with that, thank you for giving us the opportunity to comment, Mr. DiFerente. And thank you to Ms. Grayson as well for her leadership.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. So our last presentation of the day will be from the Arlington Partnership for Children, Youth, and Families, Kim DeBlaw and Lynn Nye. I think we're hearing first from Ms. DeBlaw, is that correct?
I'm happy to start.
Great.
My name is Kim DeBlau. I am a community member of the Arlington Partnership for Children, Youth, and Families. This is a community-led advisory group comprised of 16 appointed community members, 8 designated Arlington County government and Arlington Public Schools staff, and other interested parties. Known as the Partnership, we focus on improving the health, well-being, and safety of children, youth, and families in Arlington through research of young people's needs, advocacy for improved policies and programs to meet those needs, and engagement of all members of our community. And we want to thank you for the opportunity to participate in today's session. As you may be aware, the partnership produces the biannual Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which is used throughout Arlington to target support and monitor progress to improve youth well-being. Reflecting on the most recent data collected in 2019, as well as data from the Your Voice Matters survey, we reviewed the proposed county and school budgets to see alignment with our efforts to prioritize the mental, social, and emotional well-being of our youth. We are especially committed to ensuring equity so that all youth, regardless of socioeconomic status, race, gender, country of origin, ability level, or any other characteristic, have access to the opportunities they need to live healthy, successful lives. As members of the school board may remember, our presentation last fall about youth mental health reflected sharp disparities across gender, race, ethnicity, and sexual orientation lines. For instance, only 61% of youth reported feeling good about themselves, with students of color reporting lower levels than white students. Girls and LGBTQ students reported levels that were significantly lower than boys and hetero students. A third of our students reported depressive symptoms, but among Hispanic girls, this number reached 46%, and it's even higher, 61%, for LGBTQ students. Unfortunately, only about 20% of students of color report getting the help they need. More than half of elementary students and 3/4 of secondary students, all races and genders, report feeling stressed, yet less than 1/4 of parents perceive their stress. Now, these numbers paint a disturbing picture, and yet we expect the next survey cycle will reveal even deeper concerns due to the global pandemic and the social justice movement. We understand that over the past year, the acuity of requests made to CR2, Crisis Link, DHS's Child and Family Services, and NAMI has increased substantially. Therefore, we strongly support the proposed APS funding increases for elementary school counselors, resources for English learners, and mental health supports, including the Social Emotional Learning Universal Screener. We hope to see positive results from this year's county-wide SEL training and outreach by the Student Support Services Office. We look forward especially to the work of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office. We were deeply concerned by the initial budget proposal to eliminate late buses and the support for middle school after-school activities. And so we're glad to hear that at least the late buses will not have to be cut, and hope the same for the after-school activities. These, of course, would exacerbate inequities and threaten youth well-being during a key developmental stage. And engagement after a year of remote school will be especially critical to restoring and strengthening youth mental and physical health. The partnership also strongly supports funding in the county budget to implement the recommendations of the Police Practices Group to enhance mental health crisis intervention and emergency human services. These and their future efforts will help ensure better access to appropriate services for all community members. We also recognize the efforts of both county and school boards to control spending and to make investments to enhance services while preserving affordability for our diverse population. We encourage the boards to intensify their efforts to promote more inclusive engagement, particularly among underrepresented families. Thank you for your time today. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for the summary, Mr. Blau. And we have a question from Ms. Garvey. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much for that report, worrisome. I was just wondering, do you see different patterns, particularly on the self-esteem issues and stress issues by school? In other words, is it like uniform throughout the county, or is there variability from school to school?
Well, I know the data is broken down by school. What we presented to the school board was rolled up data county-wide. I would have to look in detail at each individual school to see if there's a pattern among those. But for now, we could certainly take that on board and perhaps do a report.
Yeah, I think that would be good because I'm wondering if some of how students feel about themselves has to do with the culture of the school, possibly. And if there's some big differences, that might indicate some steps to take, possibly. If it's uniform, then, we just need to kind of be dealing with it as a whole. But there might be some nuggets of possibilities of what to do in that data. So I'd be interested in that. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Looks like, and certainly, Mr. Nye, if you have thoughts that you wanted to add, because you
Sure.
magically appeared.
Yes, hi. Hello, everyone. Kim, thank you for doing such a good job at delivering our prepared presentation to the board. I don't have anything to add particularly. I just want to introduce myself. I'm Lin Ye. I serve as the prevention director with DHS. And I just want to, I'm serving as an interim coordinator in place of Kim Duran, who you're very familiar with. And with DHS's support, leadership support, we are, doing our very best to provide a seamless transition in terms of Kim's vacancy to continue the good work with the partnership. I would like to highlight, though, that we are very focused on equity and centering race in the work of the partnership. And the conversation has started, including training that we are, having with our partnership members, and our programming as we roll out will really have a lens of equity in everything that we do, including how we collect data and what we do with the data as well. I'm very happy to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Nice to meet you.
Yes,
yes,
thank you.
Thank you for speaking up, and your comments centering race as is so important in our ongoing work that both boards are committed to and have more work to do on. So thank you as well to you, Kim, for your full report. I will see if there are any other questions. I do know that the partnership's work is a reminder at the end of this session of how much is at stake in the well-being of our young people. And we all know that COVID has been very difficult on the mental health of our young people. And so that is certainly something that we're all called to continue to invest in and see how we can make investments in this budget as able into that work. So seeing no other questions or concerns, I want to just send it over to Madam Chair of the school board for any concluding remarks. We're very close to being extraordinarily and unusually punctual, so I'll send it to Ms. O'Grady and try not to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory on the punctuality. Go ahead, Ms. O'Grady.
Thank you very much, Mr. DiFerente. I was going to pass it along to Ms. Diaz-Torres for maybe a 30-second comment to thank the partnership for its work, because she does serve as our liaison to the group. Ms. Diaz-Torres.
I will try to be as brief as possible so that we can maintain this on-time departure. But I do just want to reiterate the importance of the presentation. I have only been in the role as a liaison with the partnership for a couple of months, but even just in those few months, it has really reinforced the importance of the investments that we're engaging in. And there's actually an intersection that I want to call out, even in the information that Kim presented. She called out the experience of our Latino students. And as you recall, earlier on, I mentioned that our English learners, only about 40% of them are not actually making annual progress. And something that is really important to remember is that if you are not feeling comfortable, if you are not safe, if your core needs have not been met, then you cannot learn. You are not in the mental space or in the position to be able to learn. And this is why it's really important that we're making these investments in this year and really focusing on our elementary counselors, the equity teams that can address some of those interim qualitative data that Ms. Garvey was asking about. They can do some surveys at the local level, at the school level, to identify some of those gaps so we can start to begin to address it while we wait to get the full partnership report in the future with the more robust data. So it's been a real joy to see the potential and the power of the partnership, and I'm just looking forward to the continuing work going forward. And I think we are now 1 minute over, so I apologize. I have ruined our entire charade here.
No. Thank you, Ms. Diaz-Torres, and we're not that obsessed with punctuality. So, we are focused on the last words that you said, which are talking about the partnership with children, youth, and families, but also we know it's ongoing partnership between the school board and the county board that best serves our community. And so we know that takes work, and we know life is not perfect, but we also know that together we can continue to try and serve our community well. So with that, unless there's anything that colleagues or school board colleagues have to add, I will pull out from behind this fancy computer the gavel, and I will go ahead and put us in recess so we can continue and adjourn for the day as we continue our work. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.